The next few parts might be hard to watch at times, but keep in mind that this is meant to be therapeutic and exorcise our demons like Believeland did for Cleveland. They won the NBA championship shortly after that film was released. I've been a Minnesota sports fan for over 40 years. After all the heartbreak we've suffered, it's impossible to remain hopeful without laughing about it every once in a while. After all, laughter is the best medicine, so try to see the humor in it and let the healing begin. And believe it or not, this is ultimately about hope. Somewhere deep down, even the most grizzled and cynical of us hopes that this might just be the year. We all want our teams to do well, otherwise why would we keep watching? And it's not all bad. The Lynx have won 4 championships in the last 8 years. Gopher women's hockey have 7 championships, the last one in 2016. The Whitecaps won their championship this year, and the Vixen were runners-up in 2018. So if we aren't using championships as our measure, how do we define how tortured Minnesota sports fans are? I think we're just going to have to lay back on the Minnesota sports therapist couch and get it all out, warts and all.
7 Fort Wayne. Martin down the court, over to Pollard. Harrison fires to Mikan. And when Big George hits, it's 69-68 the Lakers. This one is close. Pollard takes it down the floor for the Lakers. He hands off to Martin. Doogie feeds Mikan, and it's good again.
George Mikan and the Minneapolis Lakers won 5 NBA championships in the 1940s and 50s. But with attendance declining, team owner Bob Short moved the team to the West Coast before the 1960 season. Since moving to LA, the Lakers have won 11 championships. In 1967, the ABA was formed, and its offices were in Minneapolis, with a familiar face as commissioner. Minnesota's original team, the Muskies, moved to Miami after the first season. The following year, the Pipers moved here from Pittsburgh, but they also moved after one season. And in 1987, Marv Wolfenson and Harvey Ratner were awarded an NBA expansion franchise, and the Timberwolves were born. I actually attended the first game. It was at the Metrodome on November 8, 1989 against Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. They eventually moved into their current home at Target Center. When it was built, Marvin Harp said that Target Center would remain privately owned. But in 1993, the same year that the North Stars left, they threatened to move the team if the city didn't buy the facility to help them pay off the rest of their mortgage. Negotiations took place and the legislature approved a deal for the facility to be bought and publicly owned, but Marvin Harp decided to sell the team to New Orleans anyway. Fortunately, David Stern and the NBA rejected the deal and eventually the Wolves were sold to Glenn Taylor. The Timberwolves have made the playoffs 9 times in their 29-year history and lost in the first round of all those appearances except for one. They made a run in 2004, and had it not been for an injury to Sam Cassell, they might have won it all. Most fans attribute the team's misfortune to bad luck in the draft. What they don't realize is that our bad luck seemed to start with the very first pick. In the 1989 NBA college draft, the Timberwolves selected Pooh Richardson, making him the first Timberwolf, right? If you asked most Minnesotans who the first Timberwolf was, that's what they'd say. But that's not true. A few weeks before Pooh was drafted, the NBA held an expansion draft for the 2 new teams, the Wolves and the Magic. The Wolves selected 11 players left unprotected by other teams. The first player taken by the Wolves? Detroit Piston Rick Mahorn. Mahorn was one of the Detroit Bad Boys. They were known for their aggressive and intimidating defensive style of play. Most of the Minnesota media was ecstatic and even declared the pick the team's first victory. Three months later, shortly before the season started, the Timberwolves hosted a weekend-long basketball celebration on the streets of downtown Minneapolis called Hoop Fest. It was to promote the team and get fans excited about the upcoming season.
From Lincoln Center in downtown Minneapolis, KSTP Channel 5 and the Minnesota Timberwolves present Hoop Fest on 5.
It included a 3-on-3 tournament, a media game, a slam dunk contest, and a televised game featuring 3 of the first Timberwolves, Rick Mahorn, Tyrone Corbin, and Pooh Richardson. Their opponents were some fans who won a drawing by a local TV station. I was one of those lucky fans. Mahorn zeroed in on guarding me because I was wearing a Michael Jordan shirt. It was the only NBA shirt I had. He was clowning around with me about it, pushing, tripping, and at one point he grabbed it and it ripped. After that weekend, Mahorn requested to renegotiate his contract and held out of training camp. The Wolves ended up trading him to Philadelphia before the season started. Ironically, the Wolves got their first win in franchise history a few weeks later against Mahorn and the Sixers. I grew up thinking he was a jerk. He ripped my shirt, and he didn't want to play for Minnesota. But 25 years later, the Bad Boys film came out. It documented the Pistons' rise and their battles with the Bulls for superiority in the East.
Dumars went down, knocked down by Jordan, and Mahorn took Jordan down, and now the Bulls, of course, retaliate. We got a fist fight now. And all the folks on both teams are involved, and Doug Collins was shoved to press row, and they're still at it. They're coming down this.
It also addressed the expansion draft. On the very same day Mahorn was chosen by Minnesota, he was celebrating the Pistons' first NBA championship that they had won 2 days earlier. Mahorn was told about it during the celebration, and he had to clean out his locker right then and there.
It was the highest of the high and the lowest of the lows. It hurts even talking about it a little bit because, I wanted to be that person to protect it. But, excuse me.
And you guys are now, I understand, not going to be the Bad Boys next year. Is that right?
No, because, one of our team members was got picked up in expansion draft.
Right. He was unprotected, and the Minnesota Wahoos got him, or whoever. The Minnesota Sea Otters, or...
I don't think wearing that shirt made a difference in whether he stayed or not, but looking back at how the whole thing affected him, I feel like an idiot for welcoming the first Timberwolf to Minnesota like that. I wish I could tell him that today and apologize. In 1984, NBA owners approved a draft lottery. The goal was to prevent teams from purposely losing to get the first pick. Previous to that, a coin flip between the 2 worst teams in each conference was used to decide who picked first. The first NBA draft lottery was held in 1985. The New York Knicks won the rights to select Patrick Ewing instead of Indiana or Golden State, who had worse records. And ever since that moment, rumors have swirled about the lottery being fixed. Minnesota fans know all too well how the Wolves have fared in the lottery. This is a graphic ranking each team in terms of how lucky they've been in the draft. I'll give you one guess who's in last place. In the team's near 30 years of existence, they've had only one first overall pick, and it took 26 years to get it, even though they've finished with the worst record in the league 3 times and in the bottom 3 countless others. But the lottery isn't rigged, right? So without winning the draft lottery, here's some of the picks the Wolves tried to build a franchise with.
Judy Eby.
Did you notice there weren't first-round picks in the early 2000s? That's because the Wolves forfeited those picks as punishment for having a secret contract with Joe Smith that illegally avoided the salary cap. Owner Glenn Taylor and Vice President Kevin McHale were both suspended. And even though McHale claimed he knew nothing about it, he said that most teams do deals like that. The Wolves just got caught. Originally, they were penalized 5 years of picks, but the league reinstated some.
Duty EB.
In the NBA, it's not always about who was picked, it's often about who wasn't. In 2009, Wolves GM David Kahn drafted Ricky Rubio with the 5th pick.
I'm Ricky Rubio, I'm not like anybody else.
And Johnny Flynn with the 6th. Who got picked at 7? We had 2 top 10 picks that year and passed on Steph Curry both times. We did hit on Kevin Garnett. You're welcome, Boston. I feel like I'm forgetting someone.